Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nedling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome everyone to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. And this is our podcast to share topics and guests that will empower you to grow as a confident leader. I'm Vicki Nedling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia, and my goal is really to help you grow your business and take it to that next level. Today, my host is Mary Ann Snow. Let me tell you about Mary Ann. At her Remote Nation Institute, Mary Ann Snow is rewriting the rules of leadership in this new age of remote, distributed, virtual, flexible work. Her experience operationalizing and optimizing flexible work programs is practical, real-world, and results-driven. Mary Ann is a recognized expert in virtual collaboration work practices and current distant communication systems that she leverages to lead highly productive distributed organizations. Mary Ann has a new book that's coming out, The Remote Worker Handbook. I'm going to say that again because everybody's going to want this. The Remote Worker Handbook. It should be out September 13th, right around the bend from this podcast. It outlines her philosophy and pragmatic approach to building and leading successful, resilient teams in today's new, ever-changing workplace. The theme for today's episode is, why are old leadership methods unsuitable for remote teams? Please join me in welcoming Mary Ann Snow.
Thanks so much, Vicki, for those very, very kind words. Much appreciated. And I'm delighted to be here to have this conversation on this topic.
Yeah, so needed. It is a part of the roadmap that a lot of people don't know, and had hesitated traveling down for years and years. You know, they just felt so uncomfortable at releasing their micromanaging or the ability for people to get the job done. And I think if any gift that COVID gave us was the realization that people can and do work well wherever they work, as long as you give them good guidance, expectations, and goals. Yeah. So I always start out with an easy question before we get into the meat of this. And I only have half an hour, so I right now know that I'm going to have you back. But what part of the country do you call home?
I'm physically based in Providence, Rhode Island, but I have to tell you, if I were to say where I'm located, anywhere the internet will take me.
That's my philosophy too. So when we talk about this topic of remote, the first thing that I want to delve into, and it's an area that I also promote and teach, and that's the new leadership skills that you need to succeed in business today, whether you're an employee, owner, or just an entrepreneur.
Team member.
Yeah, a team member, everyone needs to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, and Vicki, you and I were chatting just before we got started today, and we were talking about the fact that we were engaging in this type of work collaboration well before COVID. Yeah. And ironically, while people have resisted the language of remote work, people have been working remotely and in what we call distributed teams or teams that are call them virtual, call them
Yeah.
whatever you want. They just don't sit in the same location. But people have been doing this for a good long time. And I remember, having to lead teams at a time period where the technology wasn't as good, and we had to get really creative about
Yeah.
how we were going to bring folks together. And yet, some of the fundamentals haven't changed. And you alluded to this. Expectations are going to be relevant whether you're in an office or when you're not in an office, so that people have clarity on what they're going to be held accountable to, right?
Yeah.
And I think there has been a misconception that line of sight equates to good job performance or productivity. And the plain fact is that anybody who's worked in an office knows that people can slack off in an office just like they can slack off outside an office. And having somebody in a physical structure with you is also not going to equate to good interpersonal skills, good collaboration skills, and good end product deliverables. And so those expectations are huge, but it's also important that you can coach and teach and provide the resources necessary so that people can execute on those expectations. And the one thing that is unique about a remote and distributed team environment is, those of us who do it, we're very dependent on technology. So you have to really kind of think about this as much an infrastructure problem as it is a leadership problem. And so leaders today not only have to be able to set the work expectations and articulate them and communicate them in a multi-channel, sometimes multicultural environment. But you also have to really kind of think about this as a multidisciplinary problem, because whether we're talking about the technology requirements, whether we're talking about security and collaboration skills, whether we're talking about really kind of engendering engagement, there are lots of aspects of running remote and distributed teams that start to touch every aspect of a talent management life cycle.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you still have to really kind of think about how are you going to practically get work done, right? Systems access, what are you going to do with documents to make sure that you've got good version control, so from a practical and a pragmatic point of view, you really have to rethink your operating structure.
And I know that onboarding is probably the very first challenge that people are failing at in this. And I see it all the time where, to start working for this contract that I have, it took almost 3 weeks to get everything to the point where I was 100% connected. And that just can't be. You need that person generally, especially a contract worker, you need them producing day one.
Right. And, that's one aspect, right? Systems access, but on job function and responsibilities, you're talking about not just access to the system, but also connection to the team, and whether we're talking about someone who is contracting with your team as in the gig economy, whether we're talking about someone who is actually coming on your team as an employee, the plain fact is that engagement is going to be equivalent to someone's capacity to not only share and just own up to the fact that something's on time or something's not on time, get to a trust place where they're going to tell you if they're having problems or if they have a concern about something, and really feel a thoughtful consideration for the people that they're working with, so that they understand that their deliverables are going to impact other people, and that it's, that they're actually going to feel concerned about that, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
if there's not trust, and if you haven't actually made an effort to engage someone on your team, fundamentally you are giving away some of the productivity that you're trying to gain with that collaboration, and that's just it's not helpful to anybody.
That's absolutely true. Why are old leadership methods unsuitable for then those remote? You gave a few examples there, but what else do we have to change?
I think, one of the things that we have to change is, I think we have to adopt an attitude of positivity, that we have to assume that we have to assume positive intent. We have to, instead of assuming that someone is messing around or not doing their job, if they're out of sight and out of mind, we have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's the starting point, right? So I think you have to check your mental attitude. If you're going to run these kind of teams, because I want you to look at it in relation to what happened at COVID and what's happening now with the Great Resignation and some of just the great discontent that's happening with team people in general. During COVID, employees really stepped up, and folks who had never engaged or never knowingly engaged, because quite frankly, if you were on a conference call before COVID, or you had some sort of a device you were using to check email, or if you happened to work while you were traveling, you were already engaging in a form of remote work.
Right.
But when COVID came, the whole world kind of stepped up and did a proof of concept of what could be accomplished in these dispersed team environments, right? Dispersed and distributed team. And we did it in a time period where schools were disrupted, where people were sharing a home space, where there was a lot of just fighting for bandwidth in many cases, where all this stuff happened, and yet people kept things together.
Right.
And they did it like adults. They were adults working independently. And now, after COVID, there's a contention in many ways that at the leadership level, that you have to bring people back into the office, because now that things have gone past lockdown, that everybody has to come back in, and it's kind of insulting for folks who went through this. They proved the model, they proved their professionalism, and now you're telling me I have to commute when gas is at an astronomical price, when I finally can use that little space I carved out for myself that's a home office, because I don't have to fight for space. So I think part of the disconnect is that many leaders that I talk to are really struggling, because they can't shift their thinking to, how do I support my remote workforce? How do I teach my remote workforce? How do I hold my remote workforce accountable? But how do I also build trust and give them the benefit of the doubt? And ironically, I think what it is forcing people to think about is, how do we measure success? And in a remote work environment, measuring success comes down to deliverables that have been articulated, and they're either met or they're not met. And then you can evaluate the quality of the work, right? And you can also really kind of think about things from a just an interpersonal collaboration perspective, a team engagement perspective, and you can come up with measures. So I think that one of the interesting things, a conversation I had with someone just the other day, is my contention right at this point in time is, it's really hard to project the role of senior executive or senior leader if you don't have a special parking space, if you don't have the corner office, if you don't have some of the physical attributes that you have that indicate to other people that you're higher on the food chain when you're in a distributed team environment. Because everybody works equal, right? To a certain extent, it's a flattening of the organization in some ways, and it's a really interesting dynamic. And so I'm saying I think we have to give up the notion that there have to be physical symbols of leadership in order for you to feel like you're the top dog on the team, right?
Yeah. Just give me the money. But but you think about it too. I know some of the corporations that I have worked with through my Toastmaster role, they had the senior leaders come in during COVID to an office, so there was like
with
seven or eight people. And I'm thinking, why would you make that person do that unless that was a quieter place for them to work and be able to strategize maybe. But to do that, that never made sense to me.
Yeah. And I think it was also really interesting is that I saw some companies pretty early on start to ask their people to come back in. And a lot of those organizations had workspaces that had doors that could close and things like that. And what they were finding is people would come in the building, but they wouldn't come out of their offices and they wouldn't go into meeting rooms together. So they would all still do virtual meetings.
And that is still going on. I just had somebody on Saturday talking about that, and they mentioned that they had about 15 people in the office, and they were never off of their computer. They were doing virtual meetings all day long, and so why did I have to come into the office, kind of thing?
Right.
So
and I
crazy.
think I think it's important to know that every study that's been done by every major consulting firm, we're talking about Gartner, we're talking about PwC, we're talking about Deloitte. So we're not talking about small, research surveys. We're talking about very, very large research surveys that are touching really kind of the pulse of what's happening. And, most people agree that having FaceTime has value. But coming to the office once a week for a specific strategic purpose, or maybe twice a week, is different than having to haul yourself into the office 5 days a week.
Right.
When, do you actually need a 9-to-5 schedule, or can you accomplish your deliverables outside of a 9-to-5 schedule? And if you're working in international teams,
that's right,
where everybody's 9-to-5 is very different, then it's just crazy. And so what's happening is people are saying, I don't want to do this anymore, and they're voting with their feet. And they are requiring of their new employers more flexibility, which is going to force leaders and supervisors who have really had much more comfort in old style command and control management to make adjustments, because they're not going to have an option. It's just going to be part of it.
Yeah. And the whole thing, I know when we started remote way back in 2010, 2011, and it was like you could have 1 day a week remote, and you couldn't do a Friday or Monday because that meant that you were going on a long weekend, and God forbid you should have fun. So, but the thing was, if you had a meeting on that prescribed day, you had to come in anyway. And so I think to your point, just if you have a meeting that you need to be face to face, then you go in for that meeting and you come home and you continue working as needed. It's interesting.
Yeah. And we live about 50 minutes south of Boston, Massachusetts on a
Oh.
good day.
Mm.
And let me just tell you, I used to work in Boston, and what are you going to do when you've got, it's in the best of times on a great day, 50 minutes to the office, about an hour on public transport. But you may have heard Boston just closed down part of their public transport for a month, and traffic has actually gotten so bad that there's an 8-mile stretch that could take 2 hours
Oh, Lord.
to navigate. So you could get stuck in the car coming from Providence to Boston for 3 hours a day, one way.
Welcome to Atlanta. The same here.
Yeah.
So can you really create meaningful work in a remote environment?
I think, the proof of concept already exists. I mean, we're not, Vicki, you and I are not making this up. We've been highly effective remote professionals for a really long time.
Yeah.
And, even if you're working locally, the likelihood that you're going to have contact with a company that has multiple locations, or maybe you're dealing with customers at a distance, or maybe you've got contractors who are off site. There's so many permutations of this now. And so, and if it was that ineffective, then we would have had a lot less productivity even pre-COVID.
Right.
And we certainly would have had less productivity during COVID. And so why wouldn't we be able to accommodate it in the this next iteration of COVID, right? The next kind of post-COVID era. And so I think it really kind of boils down to, what's the operating framework that you create that will enable people to be able to do it? Because the technology is better than it's ever been.
Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of interesting is we're at an inflection point where there are conceivably 5 different age generations that are in the workforce right now. And we're getting people into the workforce now who have never lived without a smartphone, never known, what don't like email, aren't interested in email, communicate differently, don't use the phone to answer phone calls, and have never been to a post office, right? And so they're building new work models that allow them to be able to be digital nomads. So they're not just asking to work from home. They're looking at constructs that will allow them to work from Bangkok, or Bali, or the Swiss mountains, any place where there's internet connection.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of actual data, a lot of empirical data. And I know that there are lots of people who say, yes, but what about the social aspects? Please don't over romanticize the office, because there were stinkers working in the office who weren't any fun to be around. Just like, there are stinkers in remote and distributed teams that aren't any fun being around. So, so it's really about what's the operating model that you're going to set up so that you can enable people to be successful, and then transition your role to enabling them, coaching them, mentoring them, holding them accountable, and removing barriers that are going to allow them to be able to meet their job commitments, and then holding them accountable like adults. What a surprise. So it's like, as a manager or leader, working as an adult with adults and asking people to live up to the responsibilities that they're accountable to.
I know with my teams, we used to always have the kickoff and the closeout in person, and we would fly them in from all over the world. But if you think about it now, I am not paying for you to have a desk, a space, the air conditioning, the water, the food, any of that during the normal day. So me flying you in for a week in a hotel is not going to break the bank, but it truly helps to build a stronger team relationship.
Yeah, and I think, even with that, I think that you and I both know that there have been time periods where different countries have taken different approaches to how they're managing this pandemic. And so even as things started opening up, I was working with clients that had international teams, and people couldn't leave because they had travel restrictions not allowing them to do. So learning how to navigate that. What do you do when you have some people in the room and you still have to have virtual folks and you want engagement? Well, part of it is you got to learn how to moderate and facilitate when some people are physically there and some people are not, so that the team itself starts to see each other as transcending location, so that we're transcending that and we're thinking of ourselves as international citizens, but also looking for ways to humanize people. So that, whether it's using folks' names, right? I mean, Vicki, you were mentioning earlier that whole construct of, accountability and deliverables and all of those sorts of things. Well, Vicki, if you're my friend and I feel there's trust between us, then that means that you can be in Atlanta, I could be in Providence, but I don't think of you less. My commitment to making sure that I make your life easier, because I know you got my back, I got your back, so we're working together on that. That's the sort of thing that will accelerate productivity. And it's the lack of trust or the lack of connection. If we treat people like, bits and bytes because they're not physically present, then they will treat us like bits and bytes, and there'll be no incentive for them to go the extra mile to do more than what's asked of them, and appreciate just their willingness to interpret, to give us the benefit of the doubt.
Right. And I also think that, it's a huge mindset and change management piece. I know that in the office, if I had an issue or a problem, and I might have emailed the person once or twice, and if I wasn't getting an answer clear in that once or twice, I just got up and walked down to their office. Well, now I think people need to understand that if you aren't clear in your direction and in your expectations, or if something comes up, even if you had something that you thought a good thought about that person on your team, why not pick up the phone or engage in a little Zoom happy hour with them, just to share your ideas, your expectations, your thoughts, your gratitude. And I think that's, we start our day, we end our day, and we might never reach out beyond email with our team.
Yeah. And it's such a missed opportunity, because, there are so many ways to connect now. And we say to ourselves, geez, that's going to take time. Well, tell me when investing in relationship hasn't taken time. And I don't care if you're in an office or if you're not in an office. You build trust over a period of time based on living up to your word, based on showing compassion and concern, based on providing feedback that is respectful and helpful and concrete and shows compassion and caring. And yes, I know this is business, but business is still conducted by people, and people are emotional creatures, and they're messy. And I can be highly professional, and I can be highly on task, and still ask you how your day is,
Absolutely.
and make sure that you're all right.
Yeah, that's, that's important. I know that there are some people that think my office work, my business is business and personal is personal. But the problem is with that is that you're not dealing with a machine. And you might have a bad day, and I'm going to think it's because you're just a jerk, but there could have been a whole lot of things going on in your life that if you would have just taken a minute to explain, be authentic, be vulnerable, allow yourself to share, then it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah, and I think this was actually a positive thing that came out of COVID, because suddenly you had millions of people who were engaging in things like we're doing right now, video conference in a different way. And we think about it. There were people who had worked with their colleagues and coworkers for years. Sometimes I talked to people who had worked together for 10, 20, 30 years, had never been in that person's home, didn't know much about their personal lives, had never actually interacted or engaged with them. Whereas they were on video conferencing calls, they were seeing what that person's home looked like. They were meeting their family members. They were meeting their kitty cats and their pets. That I met somebody's bunny rabbit once. And it's just so. And we met their children. We met their significant others. We met, just them in a much more vulnerable setting.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you're female, if you're male, if you're young, if you're old. When you're sitting in your house, it's just a different vibe. And it was the leaders who made it okay, who said to folks, none of that matters because this is the circumstance we're in, and we're working together, who allowed that stuff to happen. Those teams got closer. Those teams felt more connected. And those teams actually stayed together post-COVID because they remembered how they were treated during COVID.
Right. It's that respect. Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask one more question before we go into the rapid fire. And that is, we talked a lot about what's work is best suited. But there are jobs out there that you just cannot do them remote. I work for UPS, and there are jobs, even in my projects, where we have to test in person.
Yeah.
And so what other industries would be unsuited for remote work?
Well, Vicki, that's changing rapidly. And I was actually with a group of folks last night. We were talking about this, and one of the projects that I'm working with is I'm working with NASA, and I'm working on a team that's going to be putting things onto the International Space Station. And we're designing experiments that have to be done on the space station by other people right now, but eventually they'll be done automatically with robotics. And so when you're saying to me what's possible or what's not possible, there are restaurants now that are, getting rid of all their counter help and having people really kind of order from kiosk, from flat screens, and then they've got someone cooking, but there are other restaurants that actually have robots cooking, so it's like there are switches happening. Telemedicine is now part of the landscape, and it's something that's reimbursable. So people are rethinking how healthcare is going to be delivered. And Amazon just bought a company called One Health. and that's going to impact it. Folks are working on autonomous vehicles. And so, today we think of how important truck drivers are, but what happens in the future remains to be seen.
Right.
Manufacturing, remains to be seen. So there will always be folks who use face-to-face as a differentiator. But when people say to me, how do you know when remote's appropriate? The first thing I say to them is, what are you trying to accomplish from your business? So what are your objectives? What's your business model? What's happening in your industry and what's happening with your competition? Work backwards from there and start thinking about remote and flexible work as an adjunct to your strategy, as a support and an extender of your strategy, and one element of your strategy, because not everybody is going to be able to be a remote company like my company is remote. And yet your company, almost every company on earth, is doing some form of remote or distributed dispersed teamwork. So you got to account for that and you have to plan for it.
Yeah. I might want to be a chef and I might always want to be in that kitchen, but I can certainly see how that I might be the only person in that kitchen. I have a heck of a good kitchen. So I definitely could see that. All right, it's time to go to our rapid fire. The first is extroverts. Can they adapt and succeed in remote work?
They really can. The event world started really kind of thinking about how to do a ton of events virtually. And so, but it opened up lots of opportunities for extroverts to get to know lots of people. A very smart person once said to me, every person I meet online is just a friend I haven't met.
That's exactly right.
So an extrovert can be as healthy in these environments as in their face-to-face environments, but it's about mental shift. You said it. It's a mental shift.
And I truly believe, being one, that introverts thrive. We are thriving because some of that fear, that I work with people on, but some of that fear of in-person kind of goes away. And
it's more than one person has said to me, it levels the playing field.
Yeah, it surely does.
Yeah.
What is the biggest barrier for remote work success?
I think it's a mindset. And I think that it is an immediate assumption that it can't work. And so I think shifting to an open-minded position where you at least are curious and you start exploring what's possible.
In my project management, I always start with process management to look at what the process is, see where there are gaps, where there are opportunities and pain points. And then you start to deconstruct and re-engineer. And I think that's what we have to do in this situation as well. Look what you're doing today and question everything you're doing. Is there a better way to do it? And can it be done virtually?
Yeah. That was actually why I wrote the book, because in 2020, so many people were coming to me struggling, right?
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure it out. And so we spent 18 months doing pro bono work where we were helping every single industry that you could possibly imagine to give them possibilities of ways forward in these types of really new environments. So it's important. It's really important. It's a different operating model, but different is not bad or good.
That's right.
It's just different.
Okay. What would be an ideal client for Remote Nation?
An ideal client for us is an organization that has a clear sense of what they're trying to accomplish, and they see remote, distributed, or dispersed teamwork as an important part of their strategy, and they want to examine their current operating structure, and they need help to really kind of think through some of the logistics, but also, they have a very engaged leadership group, senior leadership group, operations team that sees the value and wants to engage and be great executive sponsors.
Awesome. So how did you pivot in these last 2 years?
There were a couple of things. One is my core business, which is business to business consulting, B2B consulting, really kind of expanded itself because, to your point, it's like, what new skills do you need? So in 2020, we stood up the Remote Nation Institute actually in 2 weeks. We put it together in 2 weeks. And started doing pro bono training of leaders. We did webinars, we did emergency seminars, we did everything possible. We have done some self-published books. I was approached by Routledge Press to do a handbook for how to operationalize the business model, which is coming out, to your point, on September 13th. And we just went into high gear because this is how we work. This is how we operate. And so for us, this was not an overnight sensation. This was a, let us help you think through this business problem, because first and foremost, we're business operations people. And we have a clear interest in helping folks. And we've already got proven techniques because we've already done the research and we already have the base framework that you can use.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So anyone that is just listening in, if you go grab a pencil and paper, and let us go ahead and share contact information. remotenationworks.org. Again, that's remotenationworks.org is the website. She's given you her email and cell phone number for those that are grabbing that. But I want you to take a moment and just explain the gift that you have for our listeners today.
So the Remote Nation Institute is redesigning work practices and standardizing the techniques that we've used for a very long time. And so we're saying to you, if you're struggling, please, first of all, we're going to give you a discount on any of our learning programs. We're giving you a 10%, and that MAS 10 is my discount code. Please be my guest. Come out to the Remote Nation Institute. We have e-learning self-paced programs. We have live stream virtual programs, professional certificate programs, lots of opportunity, lots of options for you. Come and see us. If you have questions, email me, and I'm happy to give you more background.
Awesome. All right, one last moment. Grab that screenshot. Well, Marianne, it has been a pleasure, and I definitely think that we can definitely have another session after your book comes out to talk about more about what the book has in it and focus really on that. There were a lot of tips that she shared with you all today. I think a lot of maybe things that would spark some thoughts that may kind of incite you to go and reach out to Marianne and go to her website at remotenationworks.org remotenationworks.org to be able to see how you can improve, because it is a change is coming, a change is needed, and you should be the person who is bringing that about. It has been such a great pleasure, Marianne, and I hope that we do meet again and can collaborate on some other things. We're very much aligned in our thought processes, I can see.
Yeah, I think we're sisters in remote work here, Vicki.
Yeah, for sure,
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. So what I'm going to do, as always, I end, life is a journey. and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Nettling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nettling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.